Would like to call this committee meeting on equity, diversity, and inclusion to order. Let the record reflect that all committee members are present. Looking for a motion on the March 12th minutes.
So moved.
Any changes, corrections, comments?
No.
All those in favor of approving it, say aye.
Aye.
Public comment? I see one person. It looks like a MSU student possibly.
Yes, an MSU student, no comment though.
For journalism.
Yeah,
Councilwoman Carter is a very good person to talk to about everything.
She loves interviews.
sounds good.
She loves
So
interviews.
make sure
Not as much as
afterward you get her.
Council member Spatafor.
All right, so our primary topic for today, discussion item B, the ordinance to repeal section 684.04. And that has to do with, it's basically repealing the current criminal ordinance law that says thou shalt use thy restroom that has thy name attached or gender. Doesn't say it like that, but basically it's a criminal law that you could go to jail if you use the wrong restroom that's designated by gender. We heard at the public hearing Monday a lot of public comment, including some written correspondences. Overwhelmingly in favor of the repeal. There was one person that spoke in opposition. I think there's at least a few things we could probably talk about today briefly before we decide what to do. And I'll just open it up to committee members first.
Yeah, so just based off of Monday's public comment, there's a couple questions. One, there has been conversation regarding harassment, not feeling safe, and just from OCA's perspective, have we had a tremendous amount of altercations with those of the opposite sex, utilizing those restrooms?
From the records that we could find, we actually looked at this a few years ago to see if it had been enforced at all, and we could find no record of it being enforced in any of our files. Now our files are much more searchable now, but we still have district court stuff going back from today, at least 15 years ago, and we could find no evidence of it being ever actually enforced. So within modern knowledge, no, we've heard nothing about people being harassed or anything like that. There are people that commit other crimes in bathrooms, but nobody breaking this law, as far as we can tell. And in terms of if someone were to harass someone else in a bathroom, right, to the extent that it's rises to the level of either criminal harassment or assault, those are crimes regardless of where you commit them.
Mm-hmm. And then I know we had one opposition on Monday, but there's been some other conversations outside of council. So I guess my other question is, so that we can continue to make this more inclusive, what about any situations where, say, there's a minor that's in a restroom and then a male comes in at the same time and there's decent exposure, and how that will apply to this?
Sure. I'm having to construct a hypothetical, right? Without knowing a very specific circumstance, it's hard to answer exactly, but if there were an indecent exposure, that's a standalone crime. So, I mean, a lot of the concerns, and I heard the public comment, a lot of the concerns have to do with things that would be criminal anyway, whether you did them in a bathroom or out in public. And I will say, it's not indecent exposure to like expose oneself to go to the bathroom, for example, but most bathrooms for both sexes have privacy protections in general. So it's not like in a men's restroom, for example, if a man were to walk in with his pants down and walk around going wee, 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 while nakedly prancing around, that would unknown, onomatopoetic. That would probably also fall under indecent exposure anyway.
Okay.
Whereas somebody standing in front of a urinal, even if there were, there's not urinals in women's bathrooms. So it's hard to exactly concoct this scenario where it could be a problem. But if somebody were to be, it's hard to imagine that we would have an indecent exposure situation. That's the best way to say it. If a man is going to the bathroom over here and a woman going to the bathroom over here in the same superstructure of a restroom. So unless they are committing a different crime already, and then they'd be committing the crime of indecent exposure. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. Just wanted to make sure I addressed the
Sure.
the concerns that was raised to me. So
And
Not the elephant in the room.
Anything to add? Any other comments? No?
I would like to see how much more of this constructed hypothetical Greg is going to share.
Right.
I'm all
I
right.
know.
All right.
I'm all right. Thanks.
No, I think we heard overwhelming, Chair. I think we heard overwhelming support, and even the one bit of testimony that we heard in opposition wasn't really in opposition. It was just about the unintended consequences, and I think the unintended consequences are covered sufficiently by other parts of our law and crimes. I would happily move the ordinance.
Yes. I guess one comment on the one person that made a opposition comment would be, they did suggest to put language in to be part of the exception, but I was thinking about that. And I'm not suggesting we do it. And I think like repeal it completely is the best idea, but just to go down that conversation, that if we added language to the exceptions, it says people that's working on bathroom, people that's, maintenance people, employees. And then the suggestion was to add like trans and non-binary people to the exception. And I was wondering, city attorney, does that, not that we're gonna do it, but wouldn't that maybe be unconstitutional because now you're naming a Elliot Larson,
Protected group.
a protected group and making them some type of exception to it.
That's interesting. That is one of the problems that's presented with that. I would say the other problem is then you have to define trans, non-binary, and part of the whole non-binary concept is that it doesn't fit neatly into a definition. And so you would have to define that and then hope that you aren't still getting it wrong. If that makes sense, it would be difficult to do because as soon as somebody showed up saying I'm non-binary, that's the affirmative defense and it's open. So at that point, it's kind of a meaningless. If you add an exception that says unless you don't want to, then
It goes back to, I think, the discussion that I started to have last month or on March 12th of should we take a more careful look at bathroom policy? And then the city attorney representative basically stated, there's two different types of policies here. One is a public restroom policy, and then the other is a criminalization of the usage of it. And so that's, I think, at least answered my question.
Well, seeing no public comment, and I mean, it's still open. The floor is open if anybody wants to add to this, but I think that over the last few meetings and weeks that we've had this, it's pretty much been fleshed out and kind of on the same page of I mean, I assume there might be some
You
silence.
say flushed out or flushed out?
Right.
Fleshed out, right? That word. Flushed toilet, yeah.
We're circling the drain here.
I mean, this is our committee to work and talk about it, but I think that it's mostly been done. So unless anybody has anything else, I know Peter, you made a motion and any further comment? So I would move repeal of section 684.04 restroom use to the committee to council for a vote.
Well, you can't make the motion.
I already made the motion.
That's what I thought, but then he just did
Peter
that
made
too.
it, yes, Peter
Okay,
made that motion.
Okay.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimous. All right, so that'll be on for the
April
public,
21st.
April 21st, after 7 o'clock. The whole council will vote on that. Anybody who wants to is welcome to speak then or before with emails and comments. look forward to receiving them. All right, so number 6 is other, and
See,
I'm sorry,
if you guys want to discuss public comment.
yes, that's what that is. I did.
Council rules.
I did want to bring this up to see if we have any, as a committee, want to do anything about. So we have public comment on all council meetings. People can register, I believe it's 4 hours.
It's,
Yes, except, yes, 4 hours.
They
Charter
can,
commission is shorter.
they can register
That's
4
not your board.
hours in advance to have a remote, public comment, because we have our meetings recorded, and that has capabilities of people calling in, to make comments. So right now, the rules set have to do it within 4 hours. I recall last year, Councilman Spatafor, that this was set for, and correct me if I'm wrong, just to, in case we have too many, to allow the city clerk and whoever has to queue it up, city TV, enough time in advance to get it ready. Since then, we haven't had too much remote comment. I think
Maybe the whole 0
we can count on,
since, what is that, August? this took place? So
we can count pretty much on one hand how many times, so we were going to consider re-looking at it to see if we can shorten the time. I don't know that it has to be 0, but maybe it can be shorter than 4. What's the committee feel, sir?
I reached out to the clerk's office,
Okay.
because my main concern was the logistics for the staff, and they said 30 minutes before the scheduled start of the meeting should be sufficient, but not like 30 minutes before the start of the meeting, the scheduled start.
Right.
So if council starts at 7:41 because Cal went late, the time is still 6:30 p.m.
Yes, and that seems like a departure in an appropriate direction to make it a little less restrictive in case somebody wants to
Yeah, that's
get on. So would we want to do anything in this committee, or do we want to just send it to where it needs to go?
I don't know. I mean, so in the audit committee, when we proposed rules, we proposed a rule change and then sent it to the committee on operations. So I think that's what we would probably do is draft up a rules change, vote on it, send it to the committee on operations, and then have them do it, because that's the committee that has jurisdiction over council meetings. Am I wrong, Sherry?
No, you're correct.
What's the charter's time frame again? Did you say it's
Well,
short?
no, this is simply the council rules.
Right, okay,
Yeah, but what is?
but what is their
the
time frame?
Charter, commission.
30 minutes.
30, okay. So,
Do we want to have something right now, or do we want to?
This is in your packet, the rules, so.
Oh, yeah.
For the next, or have it for the next meeting with something drafted by then.
I think in the second paragraph where would need to be changed. Those 4 jumped out at me already.
Yeah.
So really, we would just probably change, and I probably should read it all the way a couple more times, but we should probably just have to change the 4 hours to 30 minutes.
Well, there's got to be, to clarify, I think we should clarify that it's scheduled,
schedule.
because it just says prior to the meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah, add schedule
Prior
after
to
before.
the scheduled start time, scheduled start time of the meeting.
Mhm. So I guess, for procedure here, can we edit this and turn it into somebody?
Yep.
Or we turn it into?
Well, it's on the record, so if you guys you all concur on these changes, then I would make the changes and get it to city operations. Now, they meet next week, but I can tell you that they have a huge
Sure.
agenda
Yes,
because
I
of the traffic control orders, and
Mhm.
they canceled a median this month, and so those got carried over, so
Yeah.
it might not show up on next week's, but it would show up the first one in May, which I believe is May 2nd.
Okay, well, let's do that unless there's
Okay.
anything else. to
Yeah,
talk about.
I would move the
Just in the,
proposed changes to read in the paragraph, second paragraph of the rule. City clerk no later than 30 minutes prior to the scheduled start time of the meeting.
Yes, I would agree with that, and I would support that motion. So any more discussion on that? All those in favor of that amendment to resolution 2024-037, which sets the remote city council meeting hearing public comments, to change it from 4 hours in advance to 30 minutes in advance after register before the start of the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimous. All right. Number 6 is other, and we had something that we're just gonna kind of just brush over, which we don't even have to talk about now because we don't have anybody here, but basically it was, what if anything are the updates on the DEI/federal administration? Or any recommendation change? I know that there was a few changes and things, but I don't know that we really need to go on the record and talk about them now until we have some more concrete information. Anybody want to talk about that, or are we good just keeping it in the back of our mind for now? City clerk, you look like you have something. City attorney.
All I will say, thank you, is that presently, nothing has changed in terms of executive orders that would apply to the city and the way that we use our own funds. And to the extent that we do any DEI activity, all of that is with general fund. Unless the only extent to which we are using federal funds that touches on DEI stuff is when it was part of an explicit federal grant to do something like that, or if a federal grant carried that as a requirement. And so far, none of those grants, most of those grants were related to ARPA, and we've spent that money. So in terms of big federal money that we've received like that, federal grant spending still requires affirmative action, which we are allowed to do with federal grant dollars. That has not changed yet. It may change, but it would be a change in how the federal government tells us to spend its money. And we haven't even received that signal yet. So at the moment, it's kind of a status quo. Nobody's coming after us.
Yeah, and that's,
Currently.
No, I recognize that. Anything regarding, I think we talked a little bit about with name title changes, is that gonna be any impact? Or just to continue to monitor?
I think continue to monitor. I don't know that.
I think, if I can interject a little bit, not a lawyer, just dressed like one sometimes.
Play more.
Although I've got 2 in the room and neither is dressed like me today. The difference between institutions like a school or college and a university is 0 of our operating dollars are federal, right? I mean, up till mentioned COVID and ARPA and those types of things, but those are spent. We've long since spent most of that, if not all of it. So a DEI coordinator in the city of Lansing is funded entirely by state and local tax dollars.
Yeah.
So that they can't tell us that we can't do that. The biggest chunk of our federal money, I think, comes through the CDBG budgets.
Yep.
Which, if you looked at Monday's presentation, very little of that had to do with justice and equity work. It was most housing and neighborhood restoration, things like that, and targeting areas mostly economically disadvantaged, not necessarily with other types of justice in mind. So from my perspective, I think Jake was right when he said we don't anticipate any challenges from what's going on in Washington for our city budget, so it should not impact any of the equity work that goes on in the city in the short term, and probably long term. That's not the legal answer. That's just you read about all the stuff going on in like larger organizations like MSU, U of M, and school districts across the state. And that's where we vary, is we don't have a significant chunk. We're really coming from the fence. They can't tell us we can't do things because we don't need their money.
Right. I do anticipate the regs that guide how HUD dollars get spent, CDBG money. I expect that those will change to be less focused on sort of all of the secondary effects that go towards equity and diversity. But I couldn't even predict that right now. I mean, it's
Tariffs
very,
are off.
very difficult. I just learned that it's very difficult to predict anything at this point.
Okay, well, any other conversation on this topic? Seeing none, anything else to talk about at all under other before we adjourn? All right, well, we are adjourned.
4:50.
Yeah. The pause for 90 days.
All set?
Yeah.
I just went
Okay.
like all turning green all of a sudden.